Call of Duty is one of the biggest franchises in gaming history, and nowadays if you want to play COD on the go, well, then you've got some options. If you're into mobile gaming, you've got Call of Duty Mobile, or with the power of cloud gaming, you can play the newest COD on pretty much any device that supports the cloud streaming system. But cast your minds back to the late 2000s and early 2010s, and cloud streaming and COD Mobile were not options. Now, if you were a PSP owner, then your only option was Call of Duty Roads to Victory. But if you are an owner of the Nintendo DS, then throughout the span of about 5 years, you had 5 different games. And that's what I want to take a look at today, that weird time in history where Activision was getting Nintendo versions of their Call of Duty games developed, because there were also Wii versions of some CODs as well. So today we have 5 different Call of Duty Nintendo DS titles to work our way through, starting with COD Modern Warfare. So Modern Warfare released on the Nintendo DS in November of 2007. This game was developed by N-Space, who were most famously known for developing Duke Nukem Time to Kill and Duke Nukem Land of the Babes. Christ. So the plot of Modern Warfare on the DS kinda maintains the same as the actual console version of the game, except you play different parts of the events that take place in the main game, so you play different missions, and there's less of a focus on trying to end the conflict as much as there is as you supporting the roles of various other characters in the game. Anyway, let's discuss that elephant in the room, the controls. Now, obviously, the Nintendo DS was not known for housing many first-person shooters. In fact, the only FPS game I'd ever played on the DS before this was the LEGO Bionicle game. Yes, a Bionicle first-person shooter exists for the DS. Anyway, you've either got a left-handed or right-handed setup, but if you go with the standard right-handed, you hold the DS in your right hand, controlling your character with the D-pad and shooting with the left bumper, and then you turn to look around using the touch stylus. And the same logic goes for left-handed settings, except this time you walk around using the A, X, B and Y buttons and shoot with the right hand bumper, and to look around you hold the stylus in your left hand and drag it on the touchscreen. If you want to aim down the sights of your gun, you tap the screen twice. If you want to reload, you tap the gun symbol on your screen. If you want to run, you push the D-pad up twice. If you want to crouch, you push the D-pad down twice. In all fairness, it maintains a lot of the Call of Duty controls and mechanics that you wouldn't think would translate very well onto the DS. It's quite impressive, to be honest. Now, as impressive as it may be, how does it actually feel to play? And the answer to that question, to be honest, is mixed. Whilst it's undoubtedly impressive that a game of this scale works on the DS as well as it does, I personally can't really get over the touchscreen controls. I'm not the biggest fan of them. Now that is just my preference, and I know some of you will enjoy them a lot more than I will, but for me, I wasn't too keen on it. The gunplay itself is fine, thankfully the hitboxes are quite generous because it can be quite hard to aim, but as a whole I would have liked more options for controls. For example, the Bionicle game I mentioned earlier let you use touchscreen controls, but also gave you the option to just change your look around buttons to either the D-pad or the A, B, X and Y buttons depending on what your preference was. Yeah, sure, it was a bit janky, but after some getting used to, it's really not that bad. Anyway, for the most part the game takes place on foot with just general combat scenarios, but there are a few situations where you'll be mounted to a turret in either a helicopter or a car. However, in those sections, obviously gameplay doesn't really change that much, you're still just looking around and shooting, you're just not doing the moving part as well. So the game has 3 different difficulty settings, that's easy, normal and hard. Now, historically, I'm not the greatest at Call of Duty. Where? Oh, God. So I elected to just go with normal, and even that honestly was quite a bit of a challenge whilst getting used to these weird controls. Now, in terms of graphics, bearing in mind this is a 2007 DS release, this game looks phenomenal. It runs pretty nicely, it looks really nice. Honestly, from a technical viewpoint, this game is very impressive. The audio is pretty on point, all the gunfire sounds really good, the explosions sound good, you can hear where enemies are coming from, it's actually really well done. The game did also feature multiplayer, but unfortunately it did not support online multiplayer, only local play. So either with friends who have their own copies of the game, or by using the classic DS feature Download Play, you and up to 3 other players could play Team Deathmatch or Capture the Flag, all the simple Call of Duty game modes, but on the go. Is it as good as online multiplayer? No, but it certainly has its own special charm to it. In terms of critical response, Modern Warfare for the DS holds a nice 75 out of 100 on Metacritic, with a slightly less impressive user score of 5.7 out of 10. Now obviously the superior version of this game was always going to be the home console counterpart, but for a DS port of a very iconic game, I have to say this is very impressive and pretty well done. Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of retro games, Nintendo DS games, then this channel will be perfect for you, so why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications of my future uploads. And let's get on with the video. Okay, so next up we have Call of Duty World at War, once again developed by N-Space and of course published by Activision. This released in November of 2008, exactly a year after Modern Warfare. Now, unlike the previous game in the series, World at War takes place during World War II. Now, once again, just like the previous game, this game pretty much follows the same story and has the same battles as World at War on consoles did, but again from a different perspective. The game starts you off in a boot camp where you learn to climb obstacles and fire and use grenades and whatnot. Speaking of obstacles, that's one of the new features of this game, climbing over things, climbing under things, and climbing up things, which I know sounds really simple, but that wasn't really a thing in the previous COD on DS. The other new mechanics in this game include being able to fire mortars and aiming those correctly, and then partaking in little mini-games to either plant bombs or defuse bombs, which involve the touchscreen. In terms of controls, the game controls pretty much identically to the previous, with just a few quality of life improvements, such as tapping a specific part of the screen to aim down the sights, and movement just feeling slightly less janky. Another improvement upon the last game was the inclusion of online multiplayer. Sadly still, it only supports up to 4 players, and unlike the home console counterpart, there's no rank up system or prestige system in place. The game does of course still support local multiplayer. The biggest loss of World at War on Nintendo DS, however, is not having the zombie mode. Oh my god, how could this be missed from this game? This is where it all started and it was so good, and it just isn't here. Can you imagine getting this game as a kid, getting really excited to play the really cool new zombies mode, and the only console you have is DS, and you find it's the only version of the game that doesn't even have zombies?
And on that terrible disappointment.
Anyway, zombies disappointment aside, World at War is definitely a superior COD DS game than the original Modern Warfare was, but it's still not a complete perfect experience. Much like the previous game, by the time you finish the campaign, there's very little replay value here, there's not much point coming back to it. In terms of critical response, World at War actually holds the exact same meta score as its predecessor, with a 75 out of 100, except this time round the user score is just 0.2 lower than the previous, with a 5.5 out of 10. Just a funny thing to note, the lowest user score for the DS version of this game reads, "Do not buy this game on DS, the controls are horrible and this game is not fun. I bought this because I played it on Xbox 360 back in the day, but this is not even close to the same game." Why would you think this is going to be the same game? Obviously a 360 game is not going to run on the DS, oh my god people. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so next up we have Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Wait, no, sorry. Call of Duty Modern Warfare Mobilized. This was again developed by N-Gage, published by Activision, and released worldwide on November 10th, 2009, alongside the home console counterparts. Now again, this DS counterpart has a story that takes place as a companion to the home console versions. Much like the original, this is set 5 years after Modern Warfare. The gameplay is of course almost identical to its 2 predecessors, just again with some minor improvements. The button on the touchscreen to aim down the sights has been made larger, which I would say is definitely an improvement because in World at War it was just a small little icon that you could very easily miss. There are some new mini-games here such as hacking into computers, which honestly wasn't very fun and was unnecessarily complicated. You are also able to take control of spy drones and a gunship, which is a pretty cool addition. Movement itself is pretty much identical to how it was in Modern Warfare, and they've got rid of the parkour-y stuff that was in World at War. Gunplay is almost exactly the same as well. There's very little recoil, everything is fine, it's just very standard. I noticed with this game more than the previous two that the frame rate does tend to struggle a little bit when you're aiming down the sights and there's more than about 1 or 2 enemies on screen at once, which is a shame, but then again this game does look a lot nicer than its predecessors as well. I do have to applaud Modern Warfare Mobilized difficulty selection screen for just being a meme by itself. It just made me laugh so much. On top of these minor improvements, they've also improved the multiplayer mode, which now features up to 6-player multiplayer, including new game modes like Sabotage, and a survival mode where you and your buddies can fend off against multiple waves of enemies. Kinda similar to the MW3 survival mode, but just not as fleshed out. It also features an arcade mode where you must complete the single-player campaign in a set time limit and you get unlockable achievements as well. It's honestly pretty cool. MW2's home console version was the game that brought us the Spec Ops mode, and sadly that did not make the jump to handheld, which is a shame, but then again I couldn't really see the DS handling those kind of things very well. There are quite a few different scenarios in Spec Ops that I just can't see working on the DS very well. The other major improvement in Modern Warfare Mobilized is that N-Space have worked on the AI for the enemies, so they can now take cover, they charge you with shotguns, they can throw grenades and whatnot, whereas before they just kind of stood in one place and fired. That was it. So it's nice to actually have some sense of realism in the game. Is it as good as MW2 home console? Of course not, it never could be. But I think what we did get is very impressive. I also appreciate that Activision decided to not call this game Modern Warfare 2 on the DS, because obviously Modern Warfare and World at War shared the same names as their home console counterparts where they blatantly weren't the same game. But if you were to buy this, you would still recognise this as being part of Modern Warfare 2 because the cover art is pretty much identical to the home console versions. Anyway, in terms of critical response, Modern Warfare Mobilized holds a very respectable 73 out of 100 on Metacritic, just 2 points lower than the previous games in the series. However, its user score is actually a bit higher than the previous two games with a 6.4 out of 10. No, I don't think this game is perfect. Yes, it has some performance issues, but out of the 3 we've looked at so far, this is by far the best. Okay, so next up we have Call of Duty Black Ops, once again of course developed by N-Space, published by Activision, and released alongside the home console versions of the game in November of 2010. I see Activision went back to just naming the games after their console counterparts, which is fine because at least this one feels like more of a Black Ops experience. And that's right guys, finally we have zombies. But let's get to that in a moment. So once again, the story is a companion piece to the home console version of the story, with 16 separate campaign levels available overall. Anyway, so let's discuss the gameplay. This is probably the biggest change in the COD DS gameplay experience we've seen so far. Right out the gate, the game now offers you 2 different control schemes. You can have the classic setup we've had in the previous few games, where you control with one hand and have the stylus in the other. But now you can map the buttons exactly as I described as that Lego Bionicle game, where you can move around with the D-pad and look around with the A, B, X and Y buttons. And that means if you're able to emulate this, then you could map the controls so that you can use an analog stick to move around and an analog stick to look around. And then you have a more complete feeling COD experience. On top of this, the new control scheme provided with the game allows you to use one of the 2 bumper buttons to aim down your sights and one to shoot, so you don't even need to tap the screen to aim anymore. Along with this brought a bunch of new options where you could change the look sensitivity and movement sensitivity, which is very nice and definitely very helpful because the preset sensitivity for this is just ridiculously slow. For the easy and normal difficulties, there's also an assisted aim that locks onto enemies for you, which, to be honest, when you're playing on the DS is very helpful. The main campaign takes place primarily on the ground, but there are now sections where you can take control of an attack helicopter and a stealth fighter jet, which is very, very cool. The multiplayer has also been improved from its predecessors as well, where there's now selectable spawn points, you have perks, you've got over 5 different game modes and 12 different maps to play on, and you can join matches in progress, and once again it's up to 6 players. Now, as I mentioned previously, again we finally get zombies in a DS COD, and you get 4 different zombie maps here. The maps aren't the most creatively named or creatively designed things I've ever seen. Literally you have house, overlook, temple and facility, but honestly they're pretty fun. However, the zombies on DS is significantly harder than its console counterparts. It's hard to hear exactly what's going on and where you need to check, and from round 1 the zombies can kill you in just 1 hit, so if you don't notice the little icon on your screen showing there's a zombie near you when you're facing a different way, that's it, you're dead. Also, the zombie laugh at the start of the round is one of the most cooked laughs I've ever heard. What the heck? Overall, this is definitely the most complete package of Call of Duty you're going to get on a Nintendo handheld system. Technically, it's very impressive, there's a lot of content, you've got a campaign, you've got multiplayer, you've got zombies, you've got that arcade mode that returns with the time trial campaign. Overall, this is just a very welcomed, good addition to the Call of Duty franchise on a handheld system. Out of the very limited range of first-person shooters for the DS, I would definitely say this is one of the best for it. In terms of critical response, Black Ops for the DS holds a 74 out of 100, pretty much identical to its predecessors. It also holds a user score almost identical to the previous game with a 6.4 out of 10. Anyway, let's move on to our final Call of Duty game for the Nintendo DS system. And finally, that takes us to Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 Defiance, and once again we're back to giving them a slightly different title to deviate them from the main console games. Of course, as you could probably guess, this was developed by N-Space and published by Activision, releasing in November of 2011, around the same time as the home console counterpart. Now, interestingly enough, MW3 Defiance is actually the last Call of Duty game to ever release on a Nintendo handheld system. The series skipped the 3DS entirely and obviously hasn't come back to the Switch. Maybe we'll see them come back to Nintendo one day, but obviously the games are just not really fit for the Switch in terms of processing power. Once again, MW3 Defiance acts as a companion narrative to the console version, which is absolutely fine. The story is serviceable, it's nothing fantastic, but it's a good time nonetheless. Now, the jump from Modern Warfare Mobilized to Black Ops in terms of quality was quite significant, and honestly, it kind of felt like they couldn't really do much different with the series once they did all the improvements for Black Ops, and I was pretty much right. Everything they did right in Black Ops has pretty much been carried across here, so once again you can change the control scheme so you can map it with buttons instead of touch controls, meaning you can aim down the sight with one button and shoot with the other. The menu design for this game is literally identical to that one seen in Black Ops, so you can see they didn't really have to do too much in this game except a palette swap for where the missions take place and some of the guns that are used. The only major change in terms of the single player experience was that now you had the option to tap the touchscreen to pull out your knife, and that means you could also now throw the knife. In previous games, if an enemy got too close to you, you could just press the shoot button and you'd hit them or stab them instead, but now it's its own fully fledged weapon, which is quite nice to see. The story features a much heavier reliance on stealth mechanics than the previous games in the series did. Whether or not you think that's a good thing is entirely up to you. I'm personally not the biggest fan of stealth, so for me I just found it a bit irritating, but if you are, then that's great. Whilst all the games struggle in terms of frame rate in certain places, I found MW3 to be the one that struggled the most out of all of them, and it did severely hinder my experience playing this game. The game looks really nice, in moments it runs really nice, but unfortunately across the board I'd say this is probably the weaker of the newer CODs on DS. Again, you have 3 different difficulties here, 14 single player missions in the campaign, and then the challenge mode again, which means there's time trials and different missions to complete, such as getting 15 kills with 75% accuracy, and as you progress through them they get harder and harder. Again, multiplayer returns, you've got the local multiplayer and the online multiplayer. This time the improvement for multiplayer is allowing players to create their own classes, which I say about time really. It took us 5 entries in the series to get a class system. Now, interestingly enough, the MW3 home console version had that survival mode where you face off against waves of terrorists, and that was actually seen in one of the previous DS entries, but for whatever reason, that just isn't here in this game. So compared to Black Ops, it leaves this game feeling a little bit more bare bones in terms of content. Now, in terms of critical response, MW3 Defiance is by far the lowest rated in the series with a 57 out of 100 score, with a lot of reviewers saying it just sadly exceeds the DS's capabilities. You can see what they're going for here, but unfortunately, the DS just couldn't handle it. And sadly, this was also reflected in the user score, with a overwhelmingly low 1.4 out of 10. I feel like if this had been ported onto the 3DS instead, this would have stood a much better chance, because that console could have handled a lot of the scenarios that the DS just couldn't, which I really do think is a shame because Activision were onto something here with their Call of Duty Nintendo handheld releases. However, if we take a look at the sales figures for the franchise on the DS as the series went on, you can kind of see why Activision probably didn't bother making these for the 3DS. COD 4 Modern Warfare sold over 1 million units for the DS, which is very, very impressive. Its immediate sequel, World at War, would go on to sell just under 1 million units as well, again another great achievement, but after this sales would begin to dwindle. Modern Warfare Mobilized only sold 400,000 copies, with Black Ops improving upon this but not reaching the heights of the first two with just shy of 600,000 units, but MW3 is where the series really dropped with just over 250,000 units sold. So from Activision's point of view, it makes sense why this was skipped in the end. Anyway, that takes us to the end of our look at Call of Duty for the Nintendo DS. Now I have to say, I was really pleasantly surprised with these games. They're all technically very impressive, some are better than others, but for the most part they're pretty solid entries to the COD series, and would definitely be worth checking out if you're a big fan of them and the Nintendo DS. If you have a favourite entry in this series for the DS, let me know in the comments down below, I'd love to hear about it, and if there's any games you want to see me cover on the channel, please let me know as well. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications for my future uploads. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.